So my talk would be focused not on museums as I work, but more on how important materials or sources can we make then available online, on museums, on archives, or other. So for that, I've brought some different examples of different moments related to the history of Basque Country and Spain. The first examples will be related to the historical memory concerning to the Spanish Civil War and what has been done on this issue. The second pack of examples will be related to the recent past of violence in the Basque Country, and we are in a very early stage of this, but I will put some examples. And the third one will be more international examples. I know that the other international advisor, Elizabeth Van Garner, mentioned some of them, but I know that the conference was not here in Derry, was in Belfast, so I will mention again some of them because I think they are very important. And at the end of this presentation, I would like to make you think about some questions like what happens with those projects that when they are not funded anymore, where are they going? Are they lost? Where are they kept? What happens in the future with them? Because they are important questions that very often we don't take into account when we are doing projects, small projects, and then what is going to be the future of them, no? All the effort that we have been doing to prepare them, what will happen with them. So, okay, so first of all, the first part of examples will be the historical memory in Spain. So I will introduce you a little bit the documentation center of historical memory that is based in Salamanca. It belongs to the Spanish government. Then I will talk a little bit about the example of Gernika, where I work, the documentation center that we have on the Spanish Civil War and the bombing of Gernika, and Gernika Gogoratuz Peace Research Center Documentation Center, more of oral histories about the bombing. And then I will mention some of the small projects, some of them related to the university and other not, related to the associations of communities that has worked for to try to recuperate everything about the historical memory. What has been, what they have done, as you will see in Spain, we don't have many examples of oral testimonies kept together. Perhaps because of after so many years of dictatorship, other things has been seen as more important than oral stories, or more to do before the oral stories. And now what happens is that many people is died, so you cannot have those oral testimonies. So I think it's very important to start with the oral testimonies from the beginning, not to happen what. Okay. The second part will be more related to the recent past of violence in the Basque Country. I will mention the sections for victims of the Basque government, and then some other victims groups that on their websites, and they try to collect all the oral stories, testimonies, bibliographies, biographies, etc., concerning of what has happened. Of course, each of them has a different point of view. Some of them they are very politicized, others not so many, but I will try to show you some of the examples. And the last part will be, as I mentioned you, some examples, I think very useful examples of places like Japan, concerning what happens with the hibakusha and all the oral testimonies and all the objects that they collected in places like Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and some other examples of new museums or new centers that concerning the theme of memory and human rights has done a nice job the last years, like Chile, Argentina, Guatemala, El Salvador, and of course the examples of the Holocaust all around the world, in the United States, in Israel, in Germany, and they are perhaps the most developed ones. Okay. When we talk about historical memory of Spain, we have to take into account that it has been a very difficult moment, and after this there were a lot of years of dictatorship, so there was not a possibility to, till, I don't know, the year 1998, 2000, many archives were closed, completely closed to the researchers. Many of them didn't allow to make research on all the files, saying that there was not a good inventory of them, but it's not real true. So this is the website of the documentation center of the. Here you have the example of the Historical Memory Documentation Center of the Spanish government, located in Salamanca. And why in Salamanca? It is located in Salamanca due to the fact that the headquarters of Franco were here during the Spanish Civil War. So this archive started having all the information that Franco and Francoists needed about their enemies. So it's an archive very much contested by the other part of the losers of the war, you know, because they have seen it like the archive of repression, you know, with many things used politically to repress the opposite side. Nowadays it changed a little bit. I don't know if you know, but in the year 2007, the previous government, the government of Zapatero, established a law of historical memory, what was not shared by all the people, and they, of course many people said that it was a very small, tiny thing that they did, but it's true that till that moment there was not any kind of law that somehow said what will happen with all those things. No, I have written down each of the example, the web page, so if you want, you can take a look later on. These archives, this documentation center has several databases, as for example the Spanish Archives Portal, what is called PARES, the State Archive Library Network, a database of members of the Armed Force and Police Force of the Second Republic, a database of missing dead Republican Army soldiers, and a guide of sources of the history to the Spanish Civil War, but has not almost any kind of information via web of oral stories. Almost you cannot see any kind of oral stories available in this archive. They try to do now virtual exhibits too, but not oral stories. This is the same for you to see how are the different databases. Okay, this is the example of our center, the Gernika Peace Museum, that was opened in 1998. At the beginning it was very focused on the Spanish Civil War and the bombing, and nowadays, since 2002, it's a foundation in which we talk about human rights, peace, and we have a room related to the Basque conflict too. We have a documentation center specialized on the Civil War and specialized on the bombing of Gernika, with a small database, quite recently put on the website, in which you can find files of books, things that appears on the newspapers, on films, etc., concerning to this issue. And Gernika Gogoratuz Peace Research Center, who has worked a lot with oral testimonies of survivors of the bombing, and they created some documentaries to talk about what happened there. But still, due very often to the lack of funding, there is not available online. And there are some things that are kept because both Gernika Gogoratuz and the museum continues working on that, but that we should do in a way that, as you have here the same problem, no? What happens with those oral stories that you recorded many years ago, but you don't have the permission to use it on a website, you don't have the permission to use it on another context that is not the context that was for what's created. Many things related to the historical memory in Spain started thanks to the work done by this association, the Asociación para la Recuperación de la Memoria Histórica, Association for the Recuperation of the Historical Memory, because there were some grandsons of people that died during the Spanish Civil War that didn't have any kind of information about their parents, their grandparents, and they wanted to find where were the mass graves that kept the bones of the grandparents. So they started a big movement, and they created a big association that, thanks to them, there was a big push on the historical memory. They did some interesting things like a map of memory, a list of victims that till that moment they were not done anywhere, exhumations. They did a lot of exhumations in different parts of Spain. And here you have a little bit how they work. All those associations, now that the new government doesn't give any kind of funds for the historical memory things, are almost to disappear, because many of them cannot maintain their teams, the working teams, without any kind of funding. And as you know, those kind of issues, they are not very attractive for enterprises to be funded. Another example is the example of what do we have in the Basque government concerning this issue. When we are talking about this example, you have to think that all those things has been done since year 2005, 6, 7, so it's something very recent, very recent. Here you have the web page of the Basque government concerning the historical memory, where there are different parts. One is the map of mass graves, the list of persons disappeared during the conflict, and some testimonies that you can see, small testimonies of some people that explain what happened during the Spanish Civil War, etc. And two, it's important, the webpage of Aranzadi. Aranzadi is a research center with a lot of anthropologists and forensics. I don't know how to say, people that do the excavation of the mass graves, and it's a good team that work a lot for that. But as you see, there are not many examples of oral testimonies. Then there are some examples of different things done in different autonomies. As you know, Spain has different autonomies, so I will put you here some examples of things done in different autonomies in Spain. This project called Nomes y Voces, what is Names and Voices, is done by the University of Galicia, and they try to have a list of victims of repression during the Spanish Civil War, maps of where are the mass graves and other repression places during the Spanish Civil War in Galicia, different dossiers, different photos, but not many oral testimonies too. And this is a project very linked to the university that got funding for a research team, and now I suppose that they will have some problems to continue with this research team. Another example, perhaps the most developed example on different autonomies, is the one of the Memorial Democratic in Catalonia. The Memorial Democratic is a public institution that it was created or established by a law in 2007 to keep the historical memory of Catalonia as a collective heritage, not only focused on the Spanish Civil War, but on the dictatorship and the transition to democracy. the public institution started doing a huge project. They had a lot of funding, so they funded many small associations to do workshops, to do projects on signalization, to create new spaces of memory, new museums. But now with the crisis, I don't know if before they had 20 people working, now they are 3. So as you will suppose that many of the things that they did, it's going to be difficult to continue. They did some things with oral stories, but their first projects were more try to collect, then try to signalize, if you travel to Catalonia, where are the places where something happened. They have a documentation center, they have a database of places of memory, maps, documents, and about Franco's symbology. This is another example. I don't know if I'm going very fast. You never know. Okay. This is another example of Andalucía, South Spain, what is called todos los nombres, all the names, that tries to pretend to collect the different microbiographies, documents, on a database about different people that lived that moment. So many of them is not possible to watch a video, but you have the oral testimony of that person, like in a short biography, if you enter. Of course, I must mention that if you don't know Spanish, many of those examples, you will not be able to visit them, because almost all of them are only in Spanish, and the ones that has been made in the different autonomous communities, many of them only in Galician or in Catalan or in Andalusia in Spain. So here too there are not a lot of testimonies, oral testimonies on video, but some biographies. The second part of my talk, it's about the recent period of our history related to our recent past of violence in the Basque Country. And as you will suppose, if the period of 75 or 76 years ago is not still finished or well done, this is a baby. Here I will show you some of the things, web pages or things that has been done the last years, but very recently too, concerning this issue. This is the web page of the Basque government, because I don't know if you know, the government created some years ago an office or a direction for victims and human rights. So they have done lots of things. Of course, they have the funding on this direction, connected, of course, with associations, different group of victims, etc. And as I will mention, still the compilation of materials, the oral stories, the audiovisual, the maps, is something to be done more deeply. It's on a very early stage, so I think that the example of accounts of the conflict kind and other examples would be very useful for us to start and to know how to do the things. No? Nowadays, that I know, it doesn't exist in the Basque Country any kind of project similar to this one, to what you are doing here at the university, to compile different sources, online or not online. So here, for example, we have a map of the suffering, in which you can, most of the examples that I have seen, they use Google. It's something that they use Google Maps to map where has been the places in which different killings, different murders, or different things happened. One is the map of suffering. The other is what they call the map of memory, in which they mention and they locate in different places of the Basque Country if there has been any kind of a sculpture, any kind of things to remember what had happened there. But still, this is not something that a lot of people know about, you know? It's not very... Now, recently, more and more documentaries has been made about the victims, the different victims. So now it seems that with the end of with the end of the conflict, as with the end of the terrorism, it seems that we will start doing more things on that. Here I would like to mention some of the victim foundations, very different one from the other, and quite isolated one from the other, with a lot of problems politically talking. And I wanted to mention too that many victims, they are not in any of those associations because they don't want to be included in any of those associations. So it's true that there are many testimonies and many people that still didn't find their place to talk about what happens to them. This is one of the this is one example. This is called the Foundation of Victims of Terrorism. It's a big foundation in which they have different materials. They have testimonies of their associated victims. Yes, here they have videos, photos. As you see, they show some of the photos, like photo of the family and the missing person that is not anymore there. They have, many of them, they have specialized documentation centers, and of course, almost all of them has list of victims, but not many of them has the same list of victims. So still, each of the association has their own list of victims. And this is another example of COVITE, is another association of victims, in which, for example, here you have how they have the list of the victims year by year. The day that happens, who was the victim, what was his occupation or her occupation, who killed or kidnapped, and where and in which province, year by year. AVT is the Association of Victims of Terrorism. Here there are included two other victims that are not concerning to the Basque conflict as the victims, and in the other groups too, as the victims of 11 March of the trains in Madrid. So here you have a list of the different victims. Always they put the profession and who did it. They normally, each of their associations, they have journals or newspapers or dossier every time, now more digital, but before in paper. And here, for example, this association has different videos that shows some victims explaining what happens to them. This is another foundation of Fernando Buesa, located in the Basque Country in Vitoria. They have done a tremendous job. They have a specialized documentation center, and they kept there all the articles appear on the news about the different attempts, the different victims, and they have done a tremendous job on educational issue. They work with schools, and they have a documentation center. But as I mentioned, almost all of those associations are small associations that need funding from the government or funding from other big places to be alive. This is an example of the Coordinadora Gesto por la Paz de Euskal Herria. This is it was a grassroots movement that each time that there was an attempt or a person killed, went onto the streets and stayed 15 minutes in silence. They have worked a lot against the victims of extortion and people that had to go to other places from the Basque Country. Now, after the conflict finished, they disappear, and they still don't know what will happen with their archives, with all the materials that they created. They are trying to digitalize the materials, and we'll see what happens with this. Those are other examples of other associations, more related to the left, perhaps radical Basque movement, in which they kept two different databases on, for example, this one, the Euskal Memoria Fundazioa. They have big books and big publications, no? And they have a different database about ETA prisoners, dead people, tortured people along the troubles of the arrested people, people killed by the dirty war of the state, by the GAL, and they have too some audiovisuals and some photos, but not a lot. But it's a complete database too, on another perspective, political perspective. This is another one, what is called the Human Rights Observatory for Basque Country, Euskal Herria. And here too, they have an online database in which you can put the different. They included two images of different photographers concerning to the Basque conflict. And this is another association called Argitus. It's a human rights association that they don't show so many examples of oral testimonies, but they are trying to get information from all kind of victims, foundations and associations joining to make a list, a compiled list, because as I mentioned, all the different associations have their own list, so they are trying to make a very complete list of how many people were killed by who, when it was in a police control, it was in a demonstration, and but they don't have any kind of oral testimonies. Another important source to work on these issues of recent past of violence in the Basque Country, quite similar to the Linen Hall Library in Belfast, is the Lascaux Foundation. This is a foundation created by a Benedictine father that started collecting all the political materials, all the great literature that appear after an election, before an election. So for many, many years, he collected a lot of materials that, because of there are only 4 people working here, they don't have enough personnel and enough money to digitalize everything, but they have a tremendous things very important when if we want to know more about the recent past of violence. They have a lot of materials from ETA and a lot of material from other, the first, all the newspapers that ETA create, and it's a very important source. Nowadays, not possible to have online things. They only explain. Very recently, they create a big foundation, and they explain. They have lots of posters, lots of things related to this issue. Okay, and now to finish, I would like to mention the different examples abroad, examples that can be useful for you too. The first 2 examples are related to Japan on what happened with the atomic bomb, and there are examples from Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Examples, they create, there is a Hiroshima Peace big center in which there is a memorial, the universities, I think, somehow participate too, and a museum. And they created some materials that I was astonished because many of them are in English too. So even if we don't understand later on what does it says, like here, you know, because it's in Japanese, for example, this peace database, they have, as you can see here, survivors' testimonies, videos of different survivors talking about what happened, books, magazine, audio materials, A-bomb artifacts. They have photos of different A-bomb artifacts, and I think it's a very good example of trying to do something similar of what you are building here. Of course, it's it's so far away that very often it's difficult to talk to them and to see, no? But as you see, it's and this is the museum of Nagasaki, that of course has a library, a documentation center, and in which you can put there your oral testimony in a quite automatic way, or you can download, you can use it. I suppose that for many of them, they got the same problem as you with the permissions, the copyright, and what happens with them. But I would like to mention those two examples because I think they are quite good examples of what can it be done. Here I put some other examples of other museums or centers that were created quite recently, as this Memorial Museum of the Resistance of Dominican Resistance in the Dominican Republic. It's a museum that was created, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, and is trying to compile a big database of the victims of this resistance movement. They have a documentation center too. They have a map of memory places, but still they don't have online oral testimonies. Here other examples of other institutions that has done a good job on trying to keep all those important materials for the history. And this is the example of Villa Grimaldi in Chile. I don't know if you know, Villa Grimaldi is a park where a big center of torture was there. Now they don't have anymore this center. It is a park, and I know that they are pretending to build a museum, and they have done a lot of, they have an oral testimonies archive, an education panel and the museum, so they show here videos and documents that explains what happens during that period in Villa Grimaldi and in Chile in general. Apart from Villa Grimaldi, in Chile you have too the new museum on memory and human rights, a big public museum created by the government. This Villa Grimaldi was created more by the community and is kept by the community, so there are different examples too that they are trying to this is an example that Elizabeth, the other international advisor, mentioned in his talk in Belfast. And this is an example of Memoria Abierta. Memoria Abierta is a group of different associations of groups that work for historical memory and human rights in Argentina. And for many years they are working on getting an archive of all the oral testimonies of grandsons, grandparents that are trying to find their relatives, and they don't have as much as their information that they really have online, I suppose because of problems of getting the copyright permissions to have it online, but they have a tremendous oral archive in their place. Apart from that, they have done different materials, audiovisual materials, maps of where were the centers, and this is a very good example of work. This is another example that Elizabeth mentioned too, which is not too much related to the oral testimonies, but to the archive. And this is an example of the police archive, the National Police Archive in Guatemala, that was found trying to do other things. They was found by chance that it was almost destroyed, all the archives of the National Police in Guatemala. So they create a working group, and they work with archivists without frontiers, and they have done a good job. And I mentioned this example because apart from all the job of cleaning, digitalizing that they are doing, cataloging that they are doing in Guatemala, they have a copy of all the materials in Austin University, Texas. What this is very important, because if something happens, I don't know, one day, all the material, a copy of all those materials that they are now cataloging is in another university in Texas. This is another example of another museum in El Salvador, what is called the Museum of Word and Image, that is trained to collect audios, videos, oral testimonies of what happens in El Salvador. They have different publications. And of course, I would like to finish with some examples of work done concerning the Holocaust victims in different places. As here you have the e-witness database, or the Yale University Library, that there, yes, you have a repository of lots of videos, small videos, and that talks about different aspects of the Holocaust. Here you have other examples of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum and all the database, the publications. Here they say that they have 63,000 oral testimonies kept on their archive, so it's a good example of. And some other here in the Yad Vashem Museum. What I don't know if all those centers of museums are coordinated and how to keep a sharing database or something. That perhaps not, because. And I wanted to finish my talk talking about the problems, what will happen if those materials that we create, if those materials that some small association communities create and want to share are not well kept. What happened with the future of them, because it is a big effort to record all of them, and what happens if they disappear. Sadly, this happens very often, that an association, a group, record good materials, and then the people disappear and nobody knows where are they. So it is important to try to collaborate, because we are doing similar job in different things. And I don't know how to say thank you in Irish, but I think it's good, and thank you.
I noticed that quite a few of the Basque examples of victims' organisations, I was trying to compare it with what's going on here in Northern Ireland. Here, some of the victims' groups represent very definite political and ideological points of view. Is it the same in the Basque country?
Yes.
And so really you have to sift through it and decide what is valuable, what is propaganda, etc.
Yes, of course. In many of the victims groups, there has been a lot of political issues that we have. If you do a research work like what you are doing here, you have to difference. One thing is the oral testimony, and another thing is the ethic of those oral testimonies. What it is said to hurt the other part, or it is said only because you want to explain what happens to you, How do you say that? How do you control? And I suppose that when we start doing things like that more deeply, we will have to put some, as we say, it doesn't mean the museum, I mean in general in the Basque Country and in Spain too, somehow how to keep the oral testimonies of different victims from different political point of views, but of course not hurting the other parts, or what is quite difficult, I don't know how it happens here when you keep oral testimonies, how they refer to the others, or if they say the others, if they say the enemies, if they say because another thing very important on those issues is the use of language. And which language in our case? Is it in Basque? Is it in Spanish? Is it in Basque and Spanish? It's very important.
Thank you.
And says a lot.
Uh, Basically, I explained before what I do and how my question would be related to your what I explained. My PhD research is dealing with literature.
Literature?
Yeah, in Spain, Ángela Figuera from the Basque Country, and Carmen Conde.
Mm-hmm.
So there is any website which deals with violence against women during the Civil War, like raping, losing their kids. There is anything specifically only related to what women did suffer, like gender violence?
In Spain, in some of
No,
the archives
in-
or in some of the
yeah,
web pages? No, no that I know. Huh? There has been done some research on women and how they suffer and how they fight during the Spanish Civil War, but I think what happens very often is that there are marvelous research done in the university that nobody knows about them. And the link between the university and the society very often is cut. And there are beautiful research that has been done in the university that at the end, I don't know why they are not published, because they don't have the opportunity to be published. And very often, the museums or other institutions don't know about them to use it as an exhibition, to use it as and yeah, I know that there are some people doing that, but online, I cannot tell you if there is. There are some documentation centers about women, and I suppose that they will tackle the theme of the Spanish Civil War, but I cannot tell you. Mm-hmm.
I noted an emphasis throughout your talk there on oral testimony. And I'm just wondering if there has been an overemphasis on recorded oral testimony at the expense of other type of archival material that might be available. I was, kind of when you mentioned Yale University and the Holocaust, and I know Gia Winter has from Yale has said that museums are the cathedrals of the 21st century, and that a huge amount of this might be a triumph of style over substance in terms of preserving. And I think particularly because of my own background in print journalism, that the first draft of history, particularly now with the attrition of print media outlets, that a huge amount of this might actually be lost. And in a sense, it was the first recording of eyewitness statements are there to be preserved. So would you find that the emphasis has been on the oral testimony at the expense of
I did the emphasis here because of the project, because of the account of the conflict that is more focused on the oral testimonies. Cain is more focused in everything, In our case, even about the Spanish Civil War and about the recent past of violence, I wouldn't say that the focus has been in oral testimonies at all. The focus has been in written stories, bibliography, archives, and other written materials, not oral. I mentioned more because of this project, to say that in many cases there was not, we didn't have the same examples there. But no, the focus has been put in other archival materials, books, writing things, and not in oral testimonies. What happens nowadays is that concerning the Spanish Civil War, many of the people that were involved directly are dying. So now it's difficult to record, and it's something that we miss, And I think another thing that I didn't mention is too that I think the victims and the people that you want to approach to make books or to make research or to record, one of the things that they ask you always is trust with the people that are approaching them. It's not that you go and if they don't trust you, they won't tell you a very personal and very painful part of their lives. And another thing is that in many cases, sometimes it's needed, If it's very close to what it happens, they are not prepared personally to talk about it. They have to do their own personal way till they are prepared to talk about it in a open way. And I think not everybody, not all the victims are prepared to express what happens in a good and positive way to build a future together, you know. But no, the oral focus was because of the project, not because it has been done like this.
I was just curious in relation to the archives of some of the radical Basques organizations. Have they come under like scrutiny by the Spanish state or anything that, you know, in relation to?
Can you repeat it?
The archive of some of the radical Basques, you know, the independence groups. Mm-hmm. Have they?
I wouldn't say radical independent group. I would say some groups of victims too,
right, yes.
by the dirty war of GAL, etc. That focus perhaps their database more on other issues different to the other ones, on ETA prisoners, on tortures, etc. Mm. Mm-hmm.
No, I was just curious. Have they been investigated by the Spanish state? You know.
I think so. Even Lascaux Foundation, the one of the Benedictines that I mentioned, when there was a big process, Spanish policemen and the youths went to the archive to see what kind of materials they have and if they were materials that could be important for their things. Yeah.
Iratxe, you're very welcome today. Good to see you. I just wanted to support the approach on oral histories because I think all too often that's the forgotten part, and it's really important in building truth recovery process that people have the opportunity after a period of time to reflect and in a very structured way to give their story, their verbal account or a written account of what happened to them and then how that sits within the other historical record. Mm-hmm. I think very often because of propaganda within conflict, the story that comes out first tends to be a distortion in order to cover the activities of the state or of other protagonists. So, you know, I think it is important that over time we have the opportunity to go back over that ground and to put an accurate account of what has taken place.
Yes, somehow you never know what is going to be told to you by the victim, you know, and if it's really something that they suffer or something that they learn to say, you know. And very often some victims, in all the cases, you know, after repeating what happens to them, they create like a story, you know. But for that, I think it's very important to combine not only oral testimonies, but with facts, with the bibliography, with the important other resources, you know. It's not, the oral testimony is very important, but there are other facts that combining them, you can know if it's only propaganda or not, you know. This is the important matter. You know, here, for example, you have Cain with such a big amount of work done, you know, and now if you combine this with the oral testimonies, each person will be able to see if they see that it's propaganda or not, or if the facts are the same, if the bibliography is the same, or what happens with it, you know. But of course, it's a terrible amount of work that you have to do little by little, and of course all those issues they are never of not everybody likes them the same way, you know.